Welcome to Portals of Perception and to a special exploration with the Metamodern Spirituality Lab. Something extraordinary happened in the year 325 when a group of men came together to decide what would be included and what would be left out of their Christian theology. The entrepreneurial startup of a new religion was coming to conclusion, and Constantine, the Roman emperor, asserted his power by summoning 318 men to establish theological control. Apparently, no woman was in attendance when the future of God and religion was decided. This event, the first gathering of the Christian bishops, is known as the Council of Nicaea. The council made two weighty decisions. The first major decision was framed in their declared creed. The second decision was made in what they've chosen to omit and leave out. The declared decision established that God is a Trinity. The idea was not original. It was co-opted from ancient mystery schools and from Hermes Trismegistus, the teaching that describe a thrice great God, an Egyptian Greek God, which by name represented a Trinitarian idea. As the early bishops responded to the charge to unify the Christian theology and discard pagan ideas, they embraced the threefolding concept, which was a core esoteric principle of Hermeticism. Hermetic philosophy was believed to hold the key to understanding the major axial religions. Although early Christians and their teachers sought to separate from pagan Christians, they also wanted to be connected to its deeper, authentic source, encapsulated in the belief that the universe is Trinitarian. They decided to incorporate and adapt this belief that became known as the Nicene Creed. It established the belief in God the Father, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and the Holy Spirit. It literally reads, we believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of all things visible and invisible, and in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, begotten from the Father, only begotten, that is, from the substance of the Father, God from God, light from light, and later it brings in the Holy Spirit. So the second decision the bishops made was in what they left out. The creed includes 4 times Father, twice mention man, 7 times God, 1 time Spirit, 3 times He, but it includes 0 times she, 0 times Goddess, 0 times Mary or Sophia, and 0 times any mention of the creative feminine principle. It does mention 4 times begotten, but from the Father. So let's consider this. 318 men, each of whom arrived in life through their mother, who gave birth to them, established a Trinitarian narrative that removed any mention of a feminine, creative, creational dimension. To rectify this mistake and fallacy, a devoted group of men and women came together this week at the Metamodern Spirituality Lab, where they gathered to reintegrate the divine feminine and celebrate the goddess. So, okay, friends, how about that as a context for your undertaking? I know you by no means focusing on the Christian theology, but I thought it would be fair to bring that context. Where would you begin in that layman, please?
Well, first of all, I would just congratulate us on having solved the problem of historical sexism. High fives, everyone.
Done.
This is Brendan, who's the caretaker of Sky Meadow. This is Mariah, who's been with us for the whole pre-retreat week. I'm obviously myself. And this is Antonia, who's joined us just for the weekend aspect. Last time, we did a God-themed inquiry for the Metamodern Spirituality Lab. And even though there are more or less gendered ways to hold the notion of the divine, it becomes obvious that there are particular qualities and concerns that do not become surfaced when you have the inquiry into God that might require an inquiry into Goddess. Relationality, intimacy, ecology, fertility, all those sorts of things that we might group broadly under the yin category. So we've gathered with a greater prominence on women in the discussions and in the layout of the ritual design of the event to do a concerted inquiry into the role of the feminine at the human level and at the intercession between the divine and the human level, and also at the abstract level, to see what the metamodern lens can reveal, but also requires from the divine feminine. What role will the goddess play in the establishment of a liminal or integrative or metamodern or game B type spiritual organization for humanity going forward? And we don't know the answer, but we've been collectively exploring, experimenting, and inquiring into that for this week.
Wonderful. So how about if we start from the experiential dimension of what is alive, what is emerging and showing up with you right this moment as you're still inside the week by way of insights, feelings, revelations, sentiments. What is finding you?
Right.
Well, I'm enjoying a profound sense of coming home and being in a place I always thought must exist somewhere. I come from a long distance away in Spokane, Washington, on the other side of the country. And it's the level of familiarity and the word intimacy pops out, has been deeply satisfying and is leaving me hungry for a lot more. It's something I'll be coming back to. I'd like to make this tradition. I hope to bring my future children to the event someday. Rope my partner in and invite ever increasing this web that we're weaving.
Ragnar, do you want?
Yeah. Well, it's been a full event, both just emotionally and in terms of all that we've been able to kind of explore collectively with each other. It feels very full, I guess, a richness that's come from the ability to inquire into these really important issues together. Obviously, the jovial high fives reveal a kind of ironic awareness that, we're making gestures towards something that is really important, but by no means have we, really tackled this in any, certainly, obviously, and not in any final sense, but we're moving in a direction, I think that's the right one. And that feels really rewarding to be able to deepen into this kind of shared inquiry space and explore, the aspects of the divine feminine, goddess archetype in a way that I think was also, missing from some of the conversation even in the metamodern space. So I feel like this is a helpful contribution to that. And I've just been, I guess, really delighted to make incredible friendships and connections with wonderful human beings. Antonia was at the last gathering here, and Mariah and I met this time, and just an incredible sense of understanding and connection, and feeling like the emergence of some kind of familial depth with each other, which I think is a kind of natural or necessary degree of intimacy for exploring these important, sometimes tough topics, but trying to make progress on a much needed integration, and to hear from the perspectives and the lived experiences of people, to honor matriarchs in our presence, and to engage in that kind of deep questioning together has felt healing, and like the first step towards something that I expect will be an ongoing, never completed project, but always a deepening into a very necessary continued harmony and integration process. So those are just a few words that, of feelings I'm sitting with.
When you asked what was emergent, what was present, and I went in and felt, I I would echo what Brendan said about a fullness and a richness was what arose for me. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I know you're going soft voice, so you can speak from inside rather than project. And I
can try to project.
I do understand the mechanics of that. Yeah.
I appreciate that. But this weekend provided an opportunity to connect with people who are maybe like-minded, but also who are different. But people who are deep thinkers, philosophers, intellectuals, heart-centered people, getting together groups of people like this and talking about these things is very, very important. And Brendan mentioned it's not like we solved the world's problems this weekend, but there is, in my opinion, something metaphysical that occurs. The more that we do this, the more that there is, from my perspective, an impulse or a charge. You could call it electromagnetic, you could call it something else, you could call it purely intellectual, whatever you want to call it. But that's how changes and expansion begins. And so I'm very grateful to be a part of that.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with you saying we generated a field out of which there is an emanatory presence that's available for anybody that resonates with that kind of cosmology from which they can be nourished.
For myself, I'm delighted by many of the specific things that have happened here. I think there have been discussions and practices and events that are rare and delightful and enjoyable and really speak to the flavor of what we hope is a spiritually informed, emerging new layer of civilization. But when I speak like that, I'm speaking like a writer and a thinker, or the guy at the front of the room who's helping to organize the event. If I speak as a participant, I feel like something deep has really gone on for me in relationship to the real and or metaphorical presence of the goddess. That the meditation that I led this morning was different than any of the ones I've led all week. It was more fluid, more watery, more melted. I think I've been more personal and emotional than I often am when I lead a retreat. And the infusing presence of something that I'm tempted to call the goddess throughout the land, throughout the engagements with the people, particularly in the natural environments that are here, has been very exquisite for me, very strong. There's a kind of fragrance that I feel is all over me now. And I don't think I'm anywhere near having assimilated what we've done so far. Even today on the last day, I feel like the opening ritual is still heavy with me. I still don't know what it has to fully show me.
Yes, so I'm feeling into everything you're describing, and one part of me wants to get the chronological overview story. The Chronos part wants to know what led to what and how you choreographed the week. Another part wants to inquire about the high point of emergence, and it may, for each one of you, and it may have been some sidebar conversation rather than the central event. And the third part is interested to inquire about how the goddess experienced herself through you this week, and how is she perhaps learning anew through the experience. Where does it feel most natural to lead into?
I would say, why don't we do the chronological part first and get that out of the way?
Okay.
That's something you want to tackle, or should I do that? Why don't you get going? I'll add in anything
Sure.
that doesn't come up.
Yeah, and I can give kind of an impressionistic take. I mean, rather than a straight, rundown through the itinerary. We folks, I guess going back to the pre-retreat, we always show up or provide the opportunity, the container for people to show up a few days early for whoever wants to be involved in the co-creation of the kind of emergent ritual that gets constructed. Each one of these is different every time we get together, and obviously has a kind of thematic element to it based on the theme that we're exploring for the lab. So that began on Tuesday. And a lot of that is kind of just people showing up, getting comfortable, sinking into the place. We make a first pass, we get familiar with the space, and we start generating ideas about what would bring forth some generative ritual activity to kind of center our thoughts and our feelings and our hearts about the place to bring something out. And over the following days, we'll then begin to kind of crystallize something collectively amongst ourselves, and things will emerge from that process that by the end of that pre-retreat period, we've kind of co-woven some kind of processional route that has at various points along that path something to engage with that people are developing and present something that offers a way into the material that we're thinking about. So obviously this opening ritual leaned into aspects of the divine feminine and the goddess. And so that was what we did for those first few days, was sort of co-construct that together, while also sitting in the mornings and doing a half-hour sit each day and having, of course, ongoing conversations all the time, getting to know each other better, generate kind of a field energy. And then on Thursday night, once we've sort of put the final touches on what we've prepared for people who are going to show up starting Friday, we get together in what's become a really important ritual in this space to kind of all share thoughts and reflective feedback from a deep emotional sense of appreciation about each other. And that is always very powerful for me, and certainly kind of one of the peak emergent experiences. So that's all kind of the pre-retreat experience. And then on the when the weekend begins on Friday, people show up and we kick things off by that opening ritual. And won't go into too much detail, but obviously if people wanted to talk more about that. And then that usually ends with a fire. So this Friday night, that ended with a fire, and then things really got going in terms of the discussions on Saturday, gathering in the morning, of course, with our 9 a.m. sit, and then going into various discussions that began with Layman and Skylar Brown beginning a conversation exploring this general set of topics, and then moved into trying to think of what one came after that.
The second discussion was around cycles and levels,
right?
And the role that feminine coded patterning might be able to contribute to existing models of developmental complexity.
Yeah. There were a number of sort of theme discussion topics and different modes of relating to this material as well. We wanted to balance both the kind of conceptual, but also the embodied in the practice element of this as well, and the relational element. So there is a mixture of different kinds of set discussions and conversations, and then mixed in with that various other kinds of activities throughout the day. Then that really, I think, culminated in a very moving event. I think Saturdays, which is the middle day of the gathering, is one of the more kind of potent experiences for me, when the field has kind of been generated and we can kind of lean into that, which we might discuss a little bit. Having some conversations where the feminine was foregrounded, and discussions of motherhood were able to come forth, immediately followed by an interrogation of the masculine in terms of what the masculine would need to hear from the feminine, what the masculine would like to say to the feminine. And so we explored these topics, and of course, obviously, always relating back to the sense of the divine feminine and the goddess throughout. That continued into today, where we've had more conversations and more events and more connection. Again, a lot of the things that I think are most meaningful are often those interstitial and sidebar conversations, as you said. But that's kind of a broad overview of the kind of layout of this gathering, which has been sort of a mixture of those kinds of discussion spaces, and then various other kinds of of events. And then so today, after this conversation, we're going to have our closing ritual, rewalk that procession, kind of close this out, and begin to kind of move into the denouement of the gathering. So in very kind of broad impressionistic terms, without a lot of the names of the discussion circles or this or that, that's more or less what we've been up to.
Yeah. Well, so who would want to build on this? The one thing that piqued my interest there inside the story you're telling, it sounds that at one point the work of Saturday had the nature, perhaps, or the tone of a kind of an archetypal constellation work of the feminine and the masculine, revealing to each other what at this point in time they perhaps are prepared to reveal through you. So that sounds compellingly fascinating.
Yeah, it felt like two bacterium exchanging RNA.
Right.
It wasn't a mix of men and women popcorning experiences. We intentionally bifurcated ourselves to try to speak as a group. And that was very effective, I think, in achieving more authenticity and emotional depth around the topics that were surfaced in the discussion.
Yeah. So the title of that exercise, interrogating the masculine, is a little provocative, and I may have chosen a different word. And I was even contemplating, like, do I want to participate in this? But I'm glad that I did, because it ended up being my favorite. It was so mature. It was deep and connecting, and it allowed for both masculine and feminine to be represented, I think, in their healthiest forms. And it was a way for us to deepen our bond as a group as well. And I'm really glad that I ended up participating in that one.
Can you just say a little bit about what does it mean participating in this context?
Oh, well, we embodied, so the women of the group embodied the feminine, embodied the goddess, and we chose different men to embody the masculine, and we asked them questions. We had prompts, and then they responded. And there was a little bit of a challenge there of as far as what questions are we going to ask them. That was up to us. So we needed to find those questions within ourselves. And I love how that was structured, because it allowed for a flow to happen.
Yeah, I would add that one of the reasons we thought that would be a really important addition to the rest of the practices and to things like the Metamodern motherhood session is that the goddess and the feminine are so often treated as the object of inspection, as that which is seductive or revealed or appearing to a gaze. So we wanted to have a session where the feminine was the agent and the inquisitor, but have the women select the men they thought who could collectively voice the masculine and see if they could be interrogated from the perspective of the goddess. And you had asked the question earlier, does any of this change anything for the goddess from the goddess's perspective, right? And we can't conclusively say anything about that, obviously. But I think there's a sense in which the exchanges between the resonant, coherent, abstracted masculine and feminine have the opportunity to upgrade the way that we experience these forces, right? We can imagine a goddess that's just the same cosmically throughout all time. We don't even have to imagine a goddess if we don't want to. But from the point of view of people who are interested in growth and development and depth and a transformation of civilization, a goddess who's also capable of growth and change and depth, and who could enter into more nuanced or richer relations with human beings and in the masculine feminine exchange, is something we would like to be able to facilitate through our thinking and speaking and hearts and relationships.
Yeah, this sounds attractive and potent. There is meditative practice that invites us, and it sounds similar to what you're doing. I'll speak for a moment from my experience and see what it brings up for you. There is a practice where we are invited to, say, for an hour or for 4 hours or for a day, literally view any person we see around us, not as their personality, but really as a representation of a divine source, in the idea of seeing all the men to represent a certain divine masculinity and all the women around you as divine, the divine lady, the creational divine lady. And the way I've experienced this is it's not an invitation to try to be sanctified or holy, but it really is a sense of seeking to observe from a different place in yourself. And I often wondered what would happen if for 1 hour all the people living on earth for 1 hour would actually see each other through these eyes. What would become possible? So we don't know, but you have actually been in this space in creating that permission, and you stepped into speaking in an agentic way, not on behalf of self, but on behalf of that representation. So is there more by way of insight or experience that you would offer from that?
One extra thing that I would add is, I think for me, there's an important element of revealing not only the divine masculine in men and the divine feminine in women, but also the reverse, because there are layers of the divine feminine in men, right? And to have the female questioners make it available to the men to express the goddess in themselves, I think is essential to this, because I don't think we can upgrade that relationship without hearing from the way that those forces interpenetrate each other.
Perhaps building on this, if you were to highlight any other moment or process within the entirety of the week that's alive in you right now because of the way it echoes, by way of perception or by way of appreciation or by way of feeling and sentiment, and you were to put a magnifying glass, which moment will you bring to life?
Favorite moment.
Well, I got to help create the opening ritual, and that was very meaningful to me as a former little girl who liked to engage in intense, rough play, and that was not always welcomed. And it was kind of socially beat and squeezed out of me, actually. And so being given a lot of space and deference, and that's what I actually wanted to share with you in the appreciation circle, Layman, that I left off because there was so much else to appreciate, was just the sense of support and love from these gentlemen that I don't even know that well, to put all of my crazy ideas out on the table and then actually immediately implement them and then have them go over very well and then receive an enormous amount of appreciation for what I brought creatively, for something I've never done before in my life. I've never designed a ritual before in my life, let alone had 20, 30 odd people participate in it, however many folks we had here, and then be put out in front of the procession. So that was really profound for me. And my favorite moment of that was in the beginning. I got a notion that we should drink some milk upon entrance into the ceremonial yurt. And I got to serve that milk to everyone. It was just turmeric milk. And I got to look in everyone's eyes, and the sense of sincerity, the sense of receptivity that people brought into that structure, really, really on a deep, deep level that I've never achieved in therapy or any kind of thought exercise, let me know that I'm just not alone. And so that's really powerful for me. That's a construct I've struggled with throughout my life, and it will continue to put wind in the sails of everything I do. I'm here going forth.
Say, this kind of connects to your earlier question around, what was coming new through the goddess, for the goddess. I felt like this was an opportunity to sort of to model different kinds of ways of being and different kinds of ways of relating in a new kind of developmentally progressive sense around issues of gender, issues of how we identify in the world and the kinds of archetypes that we find spiritual and psychological representation through. If this is a metamodern retreat or a metamodern lab, so we're experimenting with what is the goddess, what is the feminine and the masculine, what do these look like on the other side of postmodernity? And it's easy and probably important to kind of tell those stories sometimes of how these ideas and these polarities have maybe evolved through human consciousness, through culture over these different epochs. And I felt very much that we were carrying that story forward, and we were enacting a new way of kind of living through and out these archetypes by questioning them, but also by allowing ourselves to live into them, by appreciating the fractal and the hybridized nature of them. And so I felt like a lot of the hangups from previous forms of expression of these sorts of things were able to kind of work through a lot of just the ways of healthy interaction that were able to be collectively modeled together over this week. And that was, I think, on the whole, my favorite aspect of this was seeing a way to honor different modes that have emerged of these maybe kind of reified senses of the masculine and the feminine, but then also appreciating the critiques that have come for those kinds of reifications. But then also on the other side of that, being able to have everyone come from a place of agency, strength, and also a kind of richness in their own goddess expression, as that looks differently for different people as they want to give that form. And so that what that looked like over the course of the week felt like, like this is a sense of a new and better way into living this out. And so in some ways, the entire gathering was sort of that for me, that kind of reached certain kinds of peaks of intensity at certain moments when there was a lot of intimacy generated and a lot of trust. But on the whole, I think that's just been my favorite takeaway from all of this. And I think that a new emerging sense of that maybe more metamodern notion of the goddess and the feminine and the masculine in conversation with each other has sort of had its an opportunity to begin emerging in this space, and that was really wonderful.
It feels and sounds less in the concept space and more perhaps in the conception of possibilities space.
That's well said. So leading up to the weekend, I had the opportunity to create my own ritual or participate more in the opening rituals. And as I felt into myself, and speaking of cycles, we had a discussion on cycles, but we didn't really talk about women's fertility cycles in that discussion. I was a little bit bummed out about that, but I guess that's because Adriana isn't here. So shout out to Adriana. But coming into this weekend, I'm in luteal phase, and for whoever doesn't know what that means, that's a more subtle kind of melancholy, lower energy, more like restful state. And so coming into the weekend, I said, I don't think I want to hold a ritual or participate. I think I just want to receive. And so showing up this weekend, I got to appreciate Mariah and Skylar and Danielle and the other women here as they embodied the goddess in its kind of more like lively, outgoing form. And I got to be like a little bit of like Swamp Thing shadow, kind of in my own space. And that was so well received and held. And Brendan noticed and checked in on me, made sure I was okay. And everyone here is present and attuned and heart-centered. And so I think my favorite aspect was being able to show up exactly how I am, which has to do with the feminine and our cyclical nature, and for that to be okay, and for me to be able to exist in this space authentically in that way.
So much of what you are describing is that the actuality of this search is in the ways of being and in the ways of permitting each other to be who they are and whatever they are with at that point in time, and the behavioral sciences and the interior attunement, a lot of which lives and operates in a pre-lingual or before language or after language. And the language is there to try to narrate it and conceptualize it. But often in metamodern spaces, there is a lot of conceptualization, especially if Layman and Brendan are around, as well as others. So it sounds like this week was very much into this collective emergent experience. And I imagine different people had the moment of a sigh of settlement and relief into the experience in their own time. What would you say to that, Layman, please?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. I mean, we still had some good, strong, supra-intellectual discussions, but there was a sense that relationship and respect and embodiment and the heart was at the center of the event in a way that we've often aspired to have it be. But this, I think, shows us the way forward for how to do that. I'm very pleased by how safe and engaged all the women here seem to be. And if I had to pick favorite moments for myself, I wrote that book on Gurdjieff that we were publicizing last time. And there's also Skylar Brown is here, who's a goddess-oriented female spiritual teacher from the Gurdjieff tradition. And so Gurdjieff's been on my mind, again, because she's here. And one of the things they focus on in that tradition very much is digesting and assimilating impressions as part of your spiritual life. And for me, there were 3 really strong impressions during the opening ceremony. The first one was a moment at the end when we were all speaking to the presence of absent women, and we had the fire going, and I looked up and these beautiful cloth tentacles that had been hung down from the ceiling were just dancing as if the goddess was animating them. A very moving moment for me. There was another moment afterwards when I'd set out to go and put out all the candles that had been used in the ritual as it was night. None of them were really in danger of starting a forest fire, but for me, it's important to symbolically close out ritual space. And Stishan and I went out to the first one, and we came back, and you swoop down through the field under the trees, and then you come up and out, and then the moon was there and huge and illuminating the fields. And there was just such an intimate sense of ease between myself and the land and between Stishan and I. It was really beautiful. And the third one was when I'd gone out into the woods, because we were in the forest for part of it, to put out that last candle where there was a Tara altar. And having put out that last candle, I was now alone and barefoot in the dark woods, pretty much in complete blackness. And all I could see was this little pavilion where everybody else was singing and dancing and the fire was going. And it was really moving to me to see that energy, to see everyone having that experience at a distance, but also for me to have a kind of personal, in complete darkness and immersion encounter with the goddess for myself. So those are the 3 moments for me that I'm still working on digesting.
Well, so I'm interested if we can try to be forensic for a moment in the sense of identifying the particular qualities. You already spoke about intimacy, and you spoke about the different modes of being. Let me run by you the 9 natures or archetypes that are available in the literature. And my interest is which of these perhaps was most prime with you or others, by way of detecting what it was that you attracted in the collective experience. So number 1, the maternal goddess, the nurturing care, that's the mother archetype. Number 2, the goddess of wisdom and knowledge that offers insight and guidance. Number 3, the nature goddess of earth is a bit different to number 1, to the maternal, the one that offers an inexhaustible richness of the natural worlds. And number 4, often talked about as the protector warrior goddess, offering immense strength and courage. I'm thinking in the Old Testament about Deborah, I'm thinking about Joan of Arc as examples. But it can appear also in subtle, invisible, courageous way in conversations, not necessarily as a really exterior warrior sense. Number 5, the goddess of alchemical healing and transformation, catalyzing rebirth, catalyzing resurrective renewal. Number 6, the sacred, the mystical goddess, the one that brings about spiritual depth to access mystical dimensions of being. Number 7, the goddess of beauty and love, inviting us to celebrate the joyous richness of being together and loving and enjoying each other's presence. And number 8, the goddess of justice and law, bringing in people the sense of fairness, the sense of rightness, the sense of ethical and moral high ground. And number 9, the divine unitive goddess, bringing us into integration, harmony, a sense that we are part of something bigger. I don't know if that's helpful by way of forensically appreciating the kaleidoscopic nature and which of those, because it's the reason I just did this is because I don't want us to be locked in a singular view of the goddess. And you already, in what you shared, you came through a variety of experiences. So which of those qualities will you highlight?
To be honest, between my one-on-one conversations and meals and full group conversations and ritual and meditation, all of those were definitely touched on just in the last 3 days. Every single one in some way. Some had more exploration and depth. Others were just a painting on a round wood in the forest, but they were all there.
Yeah, I was also going to say all, but there were certainly moments when one form was particularly more salient than others. I like that you named the fact of the warrior goddess showing up in conversation. I think, well, obviously there's not a lot of martial activity we were up to this week, and we weren't doing sword jousting or anything like that. But in terms of the kind of forward, assertive and forceful aspect of the divine feminine showing up, I felt like that was beautifully presenced a number of times in a way that that was powerful and important. The earth goddess archetype is, I think, just sort of always in the background here at Sky Meadow, given the just really enchanted beauty and fecundity of this place. So that's sort of often the natural backdrop, but I think was highlighted and sort of amplified in this context, or given what we were exploring.
Can I slow down and give a little specifics?
Sure.
So in our ritual, we had a station, if you will, a little stone enclosure where people were invited to each take a turn expressing archetypal rage, grief, the dark side. And that was a fantastic place for the warrior goddess to be expressed. That was very powerful for many people. And then in the nature, not just being the backdrop, but actually being a participant, people were covered in caterpillars as we walked through the meadow, and there were crows talking to us in the forest. And at one point there were coyotes off in the distance that the whole group reacted to with howling. So it was very much a give and take. Nature was engaging with us, and we weren't just walking on top of her.
Yeah.
Was that owl last night?
I agree. I feel that all of the ones that you mentioned were present. Probably the sacred wisdom element for me was most palpable. But the nature one is very present as well. One of my favorite kind of sensory experiences walking through the forest here, the forest floor is so like soft and springy and bouncy here. It has this welcoming element to it. And I haven't felt a forest floor like that previously. So it really struck me. And the experiences.
Was this a barefoot walking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for those who want it to be.
For some of us.
Yeah.
It was for me. Yeah. And then sitting around the fire gazing, of course, being a wonderfully meditative practice, and just sharing stories as a group of mystical and unexplainable and strange experiences. That felt really fun and powerful as well. So those were two standout things for me that felt sacred, mystical, and also nature-based.
Yeah, I agree that the full spectrum of those goddesses you laid out were there. I think looking back, trying to characterize all of it, for me, the goddess of alchemical healing stands really prominently for me. I think those moments where the collective of men and women communicating around and through and as the goddess, there were moments of melting and healing and emotional sharing there. There was a kind of intimacy and resolving of ancient tension that really struck me, and I think I'll be, processing for some time, that depth of emotional alchemical transformation between the sexualized aspects of reality. And one other thing that I'll add on this topic is we had a beautiful discussion about whether or not the classical life archetypes for women of the maiden, the mother, and the crone are sufficient in a metamodern context, and particularly if life is expanding to some degree and we don't have to breed right away in order to perpetuate the species. What else might need to be taken into account in the set of feminine archetypes? And we really looked at both the girl who precedes the maiden and isn't necessarily rushed into the role of being a sexual or reproductive object, but also the matriarch who comes after motherhood, or even for the women who haven't gone through all of those motherhood experiences. And for me, I look at all these people and I see a lot of esoteric potential. They all strike me as being roughly from the shamanoid subclass of the species. And one way to think about that is the witchy people. And when I think about the matriarch, I think about matriarchs who are witchy and then matriarchs of witches. And I think that's a way in to begin to think about subdivisions of the matriarchal archetype that really haven't been explored yet and require a lot of us to get together and pool our information and our analysis to figure out.
And our lived experience and our lineages and.
Yeah, and just one quick observation too on the on that warrior goddess figure. I feel like, again, that can kind of show up differently in kind of different cultural epochs. And obviously there is a classical version of that, and Anat and Athena to some degree, and other kinds of actual warrior goddesses. But I think if you're looking at like a postmodern context, that gets sort of activated in the sense of activist and someone trying to actively change kind of prevailing patriarchal gender dynamics and speak truth to that power, et cetera, which is where a lot of strength can show up. What was really powerful to me was the sense in which how many of the encounters here, that was sort of a given, and we could then move into a power that was less needing to assert itself so in a kind of aggressive way. It sort of took comfort and solace as the given expectation and assumption that the feminine is coming from a source of power, and therefore didn't need to assert it in such a kind of extreme way as can happen sometimes in certain forms of that kind of more activist archetype. And so that was, again, sort of one of those examples for me that felt like we were really in the presence of something really healing, new, and powerful to see. And I've seen that a lot in my younger sister, for example, and how she shows up in the world, and many other female friends that are sort of, there's a generational component to that, I think, for sure, of standing on the shoulders of people who have gone through that activist tradition and the sort of expansion of our collective understanding around issues of gender and equality and equity and these sorts of things, but then also being able to just rest into that and then be able to deepen into a relationship, including and especially masculine feminine relationships that have that as already sort of a given pretext or subtext. And I felt that very alive, and that was very moving and significant to me.
It's alive even on this episode, because I'm wearing a T-shirt from my mom's 1977 Now group. It says "Ladies Sewing Circle," and on the bottom it says "and Terrorist Society." And it was a joke, but they were reacting to the male reaction to their outrage that our police chief in our town said that there was a string of rapes occurring and that women should, quote, lay back and enjoy it. So there was a lot of contention, and that is our history, and it's not entirely resolved. But having grown up with a mother who lived through this, I can show up and be at ease with men and not feel like I need to prove myself or have written a book to be allowed to be here, and to know that when I do have something to say, everyone's going to stop and make room for it. So it was it feels so good to be in a new place.
Yes.
The beginning of a new place.
Yes. Let me ask about the wisdom that's emerging in this week with you, specifically about the release or the integration, the transcendence of the polarity of the god and the goddess. Because if we eliminate distinctions, we eliminate some emergent capacity and we eliminate novelty. So we don't want to lose the distinctions. And so the inquiry is, what is it that we're actually talking about when we talk about these two archetypes? Are we talking about different imageries? Are we talking about different presence and power that you're already describing? You talked about intimacy, and I'm sensing into that. Are we talking about different sense organs and different ways of knowing? Are we talking about different leadership modalities? I've been operating in another part of my life in the leadership space and observed that perhaps the most important leadership trend in the last 6-7 decades has been women in leadership, but it doesn't mean that we have actually truly integrated those energies in the fuller sense in the world. I don't think we have yet. So, or are we talking about different ways, different capacities, different expressions of love, of compassion, of emergence? So I'm describing different ways one could appreciate that polarity, and what is it that we're actually talking about, and how are those integrating in us? Please, Layman.
Yeah, we've been trying to explore that as well, because the different modes of approaching this have been differently emphasized at traditional, modern, postmodern stages of sociocognitive complexity. We've been trying to figure out how to approach it best at the metamodern level. And one of the places we originally started out was with clusters of qualities that are more associated with sort of a yin-yang dynamic, with the element of sociological critique still involved, which is some of those things that get put into the yin category may be artifacts of cultural bias, and other elements in that category may be structural aspects of humanity, of life, of the cosmos per se. So there is a way in which the goddess is the imaginal constellating of the set of non-sociological yin qualities. So that's one of the ways we've been exploring this. We've certainly been looking at it as a modality. We had a discussion this morning about philosophies of the right brain and how you do nonlinear and affective and embodied and intuitive processing as a sense-making style. But I think there are some basic questions about whether or not dualistic models are very useful for us, or in what way they are useful for us, given their historical problems and given our access to non-dual states of consciousness. And maybe Antonia would say a few things about whether it's worthwhile to have masculine and feminine modes. Well, I will just pretend bass.
Perfect. This is a favorite topic of mine, polarity, masculine and feminine dynamics. I've done some studying into yogic intimacy and polarity work, polarity practices. And there is something really valuable about having these distinctions and about having poles and having a spectrum between those poles, but being able to create a magnetism, being able to create something that pulls together and also something that repels, not necessarily in a bad way, just in a separation, individuation way. Like we are separate and we can be as one. I feel like there is a lot of healing that we are doing collectively and that still needs to be done in order for us to maybe eventually get to a place where we feel really comfortable around all of this. This is still a kind of inflammatory, delicate topic for now. I don't think it always will be. I think we're in the process of figuring it all out, sensing into, what are the distinctions, what are the differences, how do we embody those in the most healthy and conscious way? How do we work with them consciously and intentionally instead of them being kind of shadowy and repressed and all of these things? And how do we make space for everything as well? Like I said, the spectrum in between those poles, or what might be outside of those poles as well.
I do have a...
Anybody else on this?
Yeah, I think for me, what's interesting is to move into that inquiry space where we can explore polarities both as potential givens, but also not as necessarily prescriptive in any given sense, and to also, I think, explore the space in which actively living into archetypal or certain kind of representational categories as we've inherited them is a totally live and open option for those who wish to do so in ways that are more familiar from sort of from different parts of our kind of cultural history, but that's an option, and that there are different ways in which that's going to show up, and to be able to honor the kind of broad spectrum of ways in which women show up from a masculine stance, quote unquote, and men from a feminine stance, quote unquote, and women showing up from a feminine stance and men from a masculine stance, and appreciating that these are very potent and helpful and generative ways of looking at the world and at ourselves and living through. And to allow for sort of that plurality of options and to explore what's possible in that space, so that we don't want to either preclude fully embodying these archetypes, but we also don't want to work from the assumption that one must fully embody these archetypes. And in some ways, that itself creates a kind of polarity that we're trying to move beyond. So there's sort of how do you have all of that as live options for people in a way that also isn't just chaotic and fragmented and incoherent, right? That there's actually sort of, there's a sense to this, there's a deep way in which people's own individuation lives into this. There's autonomy and agency in this, and that we get sort of those maximal set of options that the kind of postmodern pluralism shows to us, but also that integration of sort of appreciating that plurality in a way that doesn't, in its own attempt to move beyond prescriptivism, just have a kind of new anti-prescriptivism, right? So these are these kinds of binary options that we're, I think, trying to navigate and move beyond as culture has been developing and thinking about these gender categories and these archetypes. And so I hopefully some element of that makes sense. It's obviously complex and there's a lot of permutations to this, but I think leaning into the complexity and the different kinds of permutations is precisely the sort of liberating aspect, at least as I see it, in the way that then women can show up from wherever it is that they're coming from, and men likewise. And I think that creates a sense of a space for a deeper trust and a deeper sense of individualism and autonomy to come forth in a kind of very healthy collective.
At the risk of taking this too far in the direction of theory, I think there's an interesting way in the metamodern spirit of trying to hold the relationship between descriptive and heuristic approaches to things. And we all were part of a discussion on the hilltop this morning that involved consideration of Gaia and how do we relate to the complex, often feminine-coded nature of the biosphere. And from the descriptive side, we don't exactly know how to evaluate as a species the level of agency and intelligence found in the biosphere. There are different arguments, and we have to be guided by our best philosophy and our best science. But at the heuristic level, it may be that the sincerely ironic as if stance, where we take the imaginal feminine agency of the biosphere as something we can participate in, that might put us in our best position to be optimal participants in its reorganization from one level of self-regulation to another one in which the human and the technological can be enfolded into the ecosystemic in a way that's enriching and thriving for all of us.
That's a really good summary of our group conversation.
Well, you are in a way answering two other questions that I came with and are active with me. Let me voice them and see what else you might want to build to that. I do think you already are in what you're all describing in some way beginning to answer these questions. The first is going back, Antonia, to what you spoke about, the healing nature. What is it? What is it that specifically now, in the third decade of the 21st century, we're still called to heal, still called to balance, still called to liberate? What are those elements? So that's one question that I'm holding that I think you are all beginning to answer. And then the other question is, again, within the specificity of this moment in time, is what is it from within your experience that is being offered, being revealed in terms of how might these capacities and capabilities can guide us in the face of the intractable, wicked meta-crisis that we are facing on multiple fronts? In other words, how are those very capacities and ways of being that you have leaned into, how might they offer us unique potential, unique yield in the face of these challenges? So I'm listening through these ears to everything you're saying. I don't know if you want to comment on any aspect of this, please.
I'll speak to your first question about what needs healing around the dynamics of masculine, feminine polarity. It's the same things that need healing in every element of existence. It's generational. So there's trauma that has occurred generation to generation that gets passed down. And there's also progress that has been occurring. So we don't want to be in progress denial, but we want to hold space and validate what has been carried on metaphysically and also epigenetically. And then also our early programming. So the things that we experience from as early as in the womb, in our developmental years, the dynamics that we see between our mothers and fathers, and how that then sets us up for our, it's known as object relations, how we interact with other people and how we project what we think of as feminine mother or masculine father onto other people. And I would say a lot of that is what needs healing. As far as your second question, I'll let somebody else take that.
We haven't been focused very strongly on the meta-crisis element during this week. I think the mood here has been a little bit different, and the general consensus has been that what we need in order to address that can't always be found in the urgency of trying to address that. But nonetheless, I see sort of three elements of what we've been doing as very pertinent to resolving these larger scale problems. One is personal, existential, magical, and we don't quite know the ripple effects of the ways that our hearts and our consciousness can affect the world when we change our relationship to the goddess. But we don't want to put that outside of what might be truly effective. I think the second and most important one is the formation of new culture, right? So that any attempts to address any of our problems, if they come from the wrong spirit, if they come from the wrong balances, if they come from the wrong heart, they'll have counterproductive effects when you implement them. And so you have to be able to do what we're doing here and have hundreds or thousands of these kinds of things around the world to start being the production hives for a sensibility that we can count on to be able to implement solutions in a wise way, or at least a healthier, more balanced, more integrated fashion. And the third element is abstract, but I think there is an element of the goddess and the feminine in the way we build our philosophies and theories that's been seriously overlooked, right? And Antonia mentioned that we wanted to have Adriana Forte here. I refer to her as a menstrual futurist, but yeah, I've had many conversations with her, and I think she's at the forefront of trying to build cyclic and feminine and modal and even menstrual type patterns into the structures we use to do our theorizing, right? Including our meta-theorizing. And that if we build integrative models, second tier models, we have to make sure that there's a full integration of all of those elements of the feminine that we point to under the rubric of yin, right? That different modes, different moods, cycles, fertility, generation, mystery, all of those things, embodiment, need to be fully actualized also at the level of the theories we construct, so that those theories don't inevitably slant toward a patriarchal ladder of progress that's going to resurrect the old problems that Game A is still suffering from.
One feeling that's arising with me as I'm absorbing everything you're sharing is the long wave dimension, the long wave nature of this work. We sometimes talked about in the ancient world how you'd have a young mason entering the project of building a cathedral, and they knew that only 3 or 4 generations later the grandson will walk into the cathedral. And we don't have necessarily that kind of a time of century, but there is so much in what you're describing that feels like a long-term project. It's not. One needs to bring into it this long wave generational transmission. You're describing in some ways the project of the next century, the next 100 years, although we hope that there can be some kind of a intensification in the coming decade. That's just a sense that's arising with me. So I'm about to approach a closing question, but if there is something else before, please. If not, I'd like to invite from within your experience. Last time when we spoke after the Metamodern Spirituality Lab about God, I invited Layman and Brendan to speak as though that Metamodern God used their voice. If you were to, from within the experience that you've had this week, if you were to imagine that the goddess was awakened and vibrantly alive with you and permeating the field you're in, through your yearning, through your searching, through your dialogue and explorations, and if you were to imagine that conductive ecology with you, and this any aspect or any nature of that creational divine feminine voice wanted to speak to humanity, or speak to the ecology you are in through your voice, what is she saying? What is she saying now? What is she hoping to convey? to invite, to encourage, or to assure, or to instruct and inform? What is it that you feel called to say, to speak in that voice?
For me, the adage came up, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. In the culture building domain that Layman was just referring to, I had a lot of opportunities to talk with participants here about cooperative living, intentional communities, and how that changes the fabric of our interaction in a way that invites some of the space that we've had to try to more cerebrally create here in this program. It brings it into the everyday and facilitates growth in the healing direction that Antonio was speaking about.
If I attempt to channel the goddess and allow her to speak through me, the sense that I was flooded with was a rich and warm sense of love and a heart opening and connecting form of love. The love that flows and is abundant and limitless. And the connection element, which speaks to what Mariah was just saying about the importance of community, that we cannot do this alone. And these more practical elements of community, but also the deep and intimate bonds that we form and the healing power of these deep relationships, whether they be a partnership or a friendship or a teacher student, these types of connections and this flowing heart-centered energy has the ability and has the power to create incredible change.
It's a strange thing as a man to imagine the goddess speaking through you. But if I attempt it in this moment, it's something like a message to all of us here that I love you and I have many ways to love you. And I need your help to show me which ways those are and which ways won't work. But I need you to show me that with love back.
Yeah. I guess I get something like, I'm in all of you. I am all of you. I need you and you need me. And the ways in which that takes shape will change and I think mature and deepen. And I think we're invited to collectively embody that evolving, maturing notion of the goddess, of a new kind of maiden, mother, matriarch, crone, and plus, and other and more. And that the ways of that manifesting in the past are to some degree prologue, but not necessarily the full story, and that we're still writing that story. We're writing it together, men and women. We need to trust each other on that. And I think that from looking to the goddess in all of us, that will collectively take shape. Obviously, being able to listen deeply and to hear women and women's experiences and the feminine speak is essential. But no, not but, and we're all listening to each other. And that is, as I imagine it, very much a long project. It is building the cathedral. It's building a new culture, a new way of being. And in the very broken world that we live in today, with all of that history of brokenness carrying forward into the future, we have that kind of muck that we can alchemize into gold. And I think that that is what the goddess is summoning us for, and inviting us to be bold in walking with her and realizing her in new ways into the future.
Just want to add one more thing, which is my delighted astonishment at the people here, that this is just a tiny sample of people who are this beautiful, this brilliant, this open-hearted, this futuristic, this benevolent, this multidimensional. And we don't know. The future is uncertain. The world could all be destroyed. But if there's any hope for it, for me, it's in people like this. And they're here, and it's amazing.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you for that. There is this is both beautiful and moving and rich, and there is an esoteric teaching that Lehman actually mentioned or hinted to before, which suggests that the higher part of a man can be represented sometime with a feminine quality, and that the higher part of the woman can sometimes take a masculine nature. And the point in the teaching is not so much about identification and the polarity aspect, but actually even more so about the deeper universal mystery of how in this effectual displacement the universe itself is engineering its own magical attraction to guarantee its own continual evolutionary process, in that when we get to participate in this process, we continually are seeking each other and seeking the collective womb that we can create for the emergent possibility that we each represent. So what I am sensing through what you are sharing today is that at that point when the God and the goddess are prepared to embrace each other inside each one of us, there is a birthing process that occurs. It's a co-creative interior and co-creative collective in the exterior process, when those two configurations are allowed to merge into perhaps a third nature that envelops and liberates a new emergent future. So for me, that's another Trinitarian imagery that's right there, present in what you're describing. So I'm more clothing with language the experience I just started to feel in those this last round, when you brought those feelings and sentiments. And I know we only touched the little bit of what you have experienced. So thank you so much. It's been generous and kind. And perhaps the last thing I'm left with, and then if anybody wants to say anything else, please. When you talk about this quality of intimacy and way of being with each other, such that people could feel safe, and people could truly open up, and people could know that they will be held in a place where they can begin a sentence without knowing how they will end the sentence. That takes time to build. You were miraculously able to bring this vessel rather quickly because of the effort and the investment. I recognize and I appreciate that it takes time to build, and then it takes time to rebuild again on the Monday morning after, when people walk away from the infused, profound space of being together. How do you fully integrate that back into your life in various circumstances where you operate, and how you stabilize that place that you started to birth yourself into anew, when perhaps you don't have that container around you, and how do you not lose hope, but rather continue to cultivate and nurture this. So I suppose I'm processing what you shared with me, and I'm trying to offer language in closing, And as sometime would be the case with the feminine, it doesn't sound like I'm closing. It sounds like I'm beginning a whole new conversation. So I'll let you perhaps bring this conversation home, please.
Well, I will say we explored a lot of the cyclical and nature of reality and the goddess. And so in the spirit of coming full circle, you opened with a reflection on the canonization of, in a sense, a very patriarchal vision for the divine. And I guess to your last question, I feel like there is a need, without falling into the traps of that kind of patriarchal institutionalization, to still stabilize and to make the norm what is in this moment a very rare, fragile, but very beautiful and important thing. And I think the call for all of us in terms of building that cathedral and making this new world is to find ways of making this durable, making this a norm, customizing this in the sense of making it the custom, making it canon, right? We should by default be able to enter a space and have that kind of trust, or maybe should isn't the right word, but ideally might. And so how do we go out into the world, all of us, and in future instances of these kinds of gatherings, and as Layman was positing or suggesting earlier, maybe there could be hundreds or thousands of these kinds of things that might happen. How do we create a world where that gets made sort of the new way of being? I think that's sort of the call, and I think that will happen in 1,000 specific idiosyncratic person-to-person exchanges. It will also happen by making new ways of living together, as Mariah's doing, in kinds of different co-housing and intentional spaces. It'll happen in making new laws and new institutions and kind of codifying this in that sense too, and bringing that feminine wisdom into that kind of more masculine sense of an institution. I think we need all of that and many more ways to make this, very emergent thing a kind of new center of gravity. At least that's what I feel called to do, and I think that's what the world seems to be calling us to. So whether that looks like assembling certainly not just men, but men and women together to reimagine the future of divinity together in a more kind of shared and equal way, whether that looks like individually, each person being invited to give expression to the divine in new archetypes, new symbols, new images. I think that's the kind of space that we're entering into, and I feel like the sensibility we've been able to cultivate is kind of the prerequisite, or the expectation, the need for being able to do that sort of work in the world.
Well, is this where we pause and land with this sense that in the ancient world they approached the building of cathedrals from stone, and we are in the time of building the interior cathedrals and the cathedrals of possibility between us in the ways that we are to embrace the new person that we are each birthing at this time? Is this a landing place? And Layman, is there any future hint that you want to drop about that?
That is a beautiful landing place, but I would like to say a couple of things about what it's like after events like this, right? Please. That there often is a contraction that follows these kinds of expansions, and that's very natural. It's unproblematic as long as we're ready for it. So we all have to be emotionally aware that we could come down off this. But there are some tactics to keep some of this going, right? One of those is our inner practice of trying to work with this stuff and retain it, continue our inner life that we've been experiencing here into other factors. One is to talk to other people in our lives about this and use that as a kind of interpersonal digestion process. One is simply to continue to be in touch with the people from this community to keep that spirit alive. But there's another element, which is you have to go in and out of these things many times, just like you have to do in your own best inner state. So, of course, we're going to have another one of these in the spring. Our hope is to keep this going twice a year and have it be a regular kind of a thing that people can anticipate being a part of, because there's an element of it that you only understand by going in and out many times.
Do you have a hint of what may be coming in the spring as the next?
I would say, think of subtle energies and subtle entities.
Okay. Okay.
But also think of DAOs and new digital organizational platforms.
And one last thing I'll throw in too to add on to that list of ways of continuing this is, we talked a lot about motherhood and birth, and so when we think about the long arc of these kinds of cultural endeavors that we're a part of, the feminine is at the core of that process in the most essential and important way, and so bringing new life into the world where these spaces have already been created and cultivated in advance that people can grow into from birth and continue that cyclical process on is really the real story of kind of our collective growth and maturation. And so that's another crucial and important thing to add.
Well, thank you.
I think we're all good, and it's a delight to see you as always, Aviv.
That's wonderful. And my 5-year young granddaughter is staying with us here today, and I feel stronger about her future. To be continued. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.